I've been thinking increasingly about the future of hardware, software, tech, design, specifically when it comes to BCI, brain-computer interfaces, and specifically why I'm making a full shift really into BCIs, why it's taking up so much of my mind space, and just in general trying to figure out what my intentions are and also why I'm so inclined to work in research in that specific domain, because it's very small. It's not necessarily one of the sexiest aspects of tech at the moment, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out what draws me to it and why. And I think I've come up with a few reasons, and I think probably the biggest reason is when you think about end goals, or rather eventualities, and try and figure out where you're trying to go in terms of the destination and what sort of products and what sort of tools will be created along that journey. So that probably doesn't make much sense, but hear me out. When technology was at its infancy, we had things like televisions that just came into being, and then we had color television, and then we had large cinema screens, and people went to the cinema, people sat around their homes in the living room and they watched television. And it really felt like magic. It felt like you were actually interacting almost with the people that you're seeing on the screen. And you could imagine a future, and a lot of people did, a lot of sci-fi writers and a lot of cinematographers and directors thought about a future where you could interact with people through, for example, holograms and holographic technology. And so people had this idea in their head that the end goal of entertainment, or the destination of interaction with media, would become holographic technology. Even when phones came along and we had screens, again, through that same medium that television was working off of, screens, we still thought to ourselves, the future of technology, the future of communication, the future of entertainment and media is going to become some sort of holographic technology. And that was reflected in the type of entertainment that we watched when it came to movies about the future, sci-fi movies, and that sort of thing. And as technology progressed, that same sentiment carried on. The destination was always the advancement of the screen, the advancement of that specific medium. But as time went on, we see technology like holograms and holographic adjacent technology like virtual reality and augmented reality. For example, the Meta Quest headset, which, albeit is very cool. I had one myself and I used it pretty much every day for about 2 or 3 months until I threw it away because it was really addictive and it wasn't very good at superimposing what you were seeing in the headset on top of the real world in a way that what didn't feel artificial. So it wasn't mature yet. And they could, and they still are, trying to mature that sort of technology. They are trying to work on it and create a smaller form factor through glasses or contact lenses and that sort of thing. But again, there's this medium of the screen. So why are we so hooked? Why are we so fixated on this intermediary device, the screen, that is separating us from what we are trying to interact with? It really got me thinking about what the end goal is, what the destination is, what are we trying to achieve, and what are the footprints that we're making in trying to achieve that goal. I believe that on the way to achieving that goal of a true virtual reality, and I'll explain what I mean by true virtual reality in a second, but I think that on our way to achieving that, we are creating more and more technology and tools that are eventually going to become completely redundant, such as screens, which has so many different applications, from phones to televisions to laptops. Most of the technology that we use to interact with digital information anyway, come through screens. The eventuality, the end goal, is not to have screens. And that's where true virtual reality comes into play. So what do I mean by true virtual reality? I think that true virtual reality is a process by which our consciousness is able to interact with artificially generated images, sounds, sensory input, and not only receive that sensory input, but also manipulate it in the same way we're able to manipulate and generate thoughts. The best way that I could describe this, or paint a picture for this, is the way that we see. You look at an object and you're not really seeing the object, you're seeing the light bounce off of the object and come back into your eyes and hit your retina. I think that technology can be applied sort of in the middle of that process, where the image is actually being received. And not to say hijack, but essentially impose information alter information and receive information between where your retina receives that picture, or between where your eardrums receives those vibrations, or even in the parts of the brain where that information is being processed, and being able to either alter it or generate something new. I think that's where the eventuality and the end goal for interaction with digital information is going. So all the technology that we have before that is sort of a stepping stone. And once we surpass that stepping stone, that technology becomes redundant. And that's why I think BCIs, brain-computer interfaces, are so important, because it is essentially moving light years ahead towards the end goal, towards the destination, and not wasting time trying to reinvent something that's already been perfected. We can't get any more ergonomic than the size of the phone screens that we already have. Humans are not getting any larger, we're not getting any smaller, and so the form factor of these devices are not getting any better. What we haven't really experimented with, however, is the form factor of BCIs, brain-computer interfaces. Invasive, non-invasive, what sort of form factor is best for most people, whether it's a headband, a cap, an earpiece, glasses, wearable technology, all of these things. These are parameters in creating the optimal brain-computer interface. We're going to develop new languages to talk to our brains and to allow our brains to talk to each other. And so that's really where I think the world is going. And that's why I'm all in. I'm really looking forward to seeing where that goes. You know, maybe I might watch this in a few years and say, well, Car, you were incredibly wrong, and we went in a completely different direction. Or, you know, I might be looking at this in a few years and say, Car, you got it right on point. I guess we'll see.